Harley Quinn is back for season 5 episode 2, and it's just as chaotic as ever, and actually went by so much faster than episode 1. Mostly because episode 1, even though it was chaotic, it had a lot of Superman stuff, a lot of plot details setting up what's going to happen in season 5. This one felt like we went to 2 plot points and the episode was over. Which isn't a bad thing, but watching shows sometimes and you have it over in like an instant feels like I'm just missing so much, even though it was a regular episode length. I do like the chaotic mess with King Shark's kids and Harley Quinn going on their kind of mini adventure as she tries to get into the Vincent Edge Club, and I love to see that Bane is finally winning. He's got himself Betty and he's got himself Goldilocks, a daughter and a girlfriend, you know, having a nice somewhat family, and finally not being let down by the world around him. We also got some great moments learning about Ivy's backstory, where she came from, how she got turned into Poison Ivy, and then the man who did it, Jason Woodrue. So this episode did have some really interesting moments to it, but I didn't think it was as strong as the first episode of season 5 so far. And I'm curious to see how the season's gonna go because of how the second episode was a little bit of a letdown compared to the other ones. I am still looking forward to seeing what they kind of get up into Metropolis, because it seems like they're going to be setting up villains for them to be going against, especially after this episode. But what we'll be doing, of course, in this video is we just reviewed it, so let's go into the breakdown and talk about some of the few Easter eggs that were within it. Because compared to the last episode that was just riddled with Superman Easter eggs, this one was very toned down compared to the last one. But we did still get some DC references from the comics, which I thought was pretty cool, and it's all tied to Poison Ivy and Jason Woodrue. Now, the episode started off with Ivy and Harley in a new pristine, pure white Metropolis home, which kind of sets the setting for what Metropolis is like in this universe, where it's pristine, it's shiny, like everything looks like it's futuristic and high-tech and fancy and all that, which is exactly what their apartment looks like. However, when King Shark decides to show up with his kids and drops off the sharks to their godparents, it just becomes a chaotic mess as they destroy the apartment. I thought that was a lot of fun because it kind of just shows that Ivy and Harley cannot have good things, and it's also fun to have the kids back, who we first saw last season once King Shark had his kids. And I find it funny that he's now living in Metropolis because of their Dutch program they have, and it looks like what they're going to do to bring back a lot of characters from the previous seasons that live in Gotham City is bring them over to Metropolis for this new life, somewhere nice, somewhere where they can have this good life with their families. And I thought it was fun to just bring back the characters, because I do like King Shark as a character in the show, so I'm glad he's still around, and they're not going to just leave him in Gotham City. Now we have Ivy going to the Botanical Research Center with Lena to get introduced to one of her leading scientists, which ends up being Jason Woodrue. And in the comics, Jason Woodrue is the Floronic Man. He's a villain of the Atom, who also becomes a villain of Swamp Thing later down the road. And he first appeared in the Atom #1 from 1962. And in this universe, Ivy was in his class and they were hooking up together as they were doing their research. And this is also where Ivy originally made Frank, which we got a little flashback to Frank being a baby, and I'm curious to see if we will be seeing Frank again. But of course, like all typical villains, Jason saw Frank and decided to take it as his idea rather than letting Poison Ivy having it, because this will give him all the grants and make him an insanely rich man. The typical villain motive where they want to be rich, they don't care about anyone else, and they'll steal other people's accomplishments so that they can do that, which leads to him leaving Ivy in the lab with all of her chemicals going off, which ends up turning her into Poison Ivy, a similar origin in the comics. Now the tables have turned when Ivy's taking Jason to the lab instead, where this is where she talks about how she was turned into a villain. She was turned into the monster because people saw her as this evil being because she wanted to save plants, she was doing her all, you know, in the comics she's an eco-terrorist. So there's a lot of things going on there. But she blames Jason for turning her into what she was, because before she was an aspiring scientist. She would have been able to make new discoveries without being seen as this villain. And it all changed because she got turned into Poison Ivy. Now, she's putting Jason through the same experiment in a way by locking him in that room with all this gas going off. Even though he begs for his life, she doesn't listen and just wants her revenge, which in the end is going to be turning him into the Floronic Man. As we saw at the end of the episode with him putting his arm onto the table, he looks like a tree in a way. Now in the comics, in his first version, he was more of a thinner character when he was a villain of the Atom, and he was still connected to Poison Ivy because he had a part in creating her in that time as well. Now, this design though makes me think they're going with the more New 52 DC Rebirth era of comics, where he looks more of a bigger, jacked up plant. Now, in the DC Rebirth era, he was still working as a professor with students like Alec Holland, who eventually turned into Swamp Thing, and also worked with Pamela Isley, who was doing research, who, because of his failed experiment, got turned into Poison Ivy just like the show. So it definitely looks like they're taking more of that DC Rebirth era of comics and taking that design and that origin story for this character. Because even in that storyline, he did have a relationship with Pamela Isley as well. So with these little key points, that is where they're going with it. And on top of it, in the comics, he did have a big part to play with the Justice League Dark storyline with Wonder Woman and everyone. So I'm curious to see how they're going to tie him to the Green, maybe the Parliament of Flowers that had taken over the Green after the Hecate, goddess of magic, had taken out the Parliament of Trees, which is a whole nother deep storyline that was changing the magical world of DC Comics. But I'm curious to see what they're going to be doing with them, because they definitely seem like they're teasing new villains for this season, and the first few episodes might be setting them all up. Episode 1 had Brainiac, now episode 2 has set up the Floronic Man. On the other side of things, we had Harley Quinn going to meet up with Lena, who is at a princess party at the Vincent Edge Club, which Vincent Edge is the father of Morgan Edge, who's a major character from the comics and the leader of Intergang. While they're at this party, we see that Bane is there with a daughter and Betty. Now, Betty was first introduced during the Valentine's Day special episode of the Harley Quinn series, but later appeared again during the Kite Man series where her and Bane got together. And that's also where Goldilocks made an appearance, where in that show she was escaping the Queen of Fables storybook. And because she had no one else in this world, Bane took her in and adopted her as his daughter. Now, I haven't actually seen the Kite Man show yet, so I had to look this up because honestly, I forgot the Kite Man show came out. So it is cool to see that they are referencing the series within the Harley Quinn show because it is a spin-off, so it's nice to see those connections to that. Now it makes me think that I gotta go watch the Kite Man series because I forgot it came out and I kind of want to watch it now. This part of the episode was a little bit chaotic and a little bit of fun, where you have Harley Quinn making Sean sad, the most chaotic shark out of the rest, and then he runs off and they end up having a feeding frenzy in the club, eating a bunch of people's arms and legs and just causing mass chaos, which I thought was a little bit fun of episode because it feels like that chaotic mess that Harley Quinn tends to be in this series. And I do love how they're continuing to keep that same tone as they change the Metropolis. Now, it definitely feels like the pristine Metropolis isn't going to be pristine for that long with Harley Quinn being there, as they cause chaotic and mayhem throughout the city as they try to do good, but also just have their chaotic antics going on with their villain friends. And I will say that was probably the part of the episode too that felt like it went over the whole episode, but it felt very, very short. And that's why I feel like the episode went by very quickly. However, it still had its fun moment. It wasn't amazing or anything, but I do love the little bit of DC references, the setup for new characters, and just to kind of see where they're going to go with this series. But let me know, what did you think of this episode, and were there any other Easter eggs and details you noticed that's from the DC universe or maybe the other seasons? And we can talk about it down in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit the like and the subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot, and you get to stay up to date with all my Marvel and DC breakdowns. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next week when it's time to watch another episode of Harley Quinn.